Hello, hello, everyone. It's so great that all of you could join us today. My name is Shivani Saini, and I'm moderating a panel that's being hosted by my company, Atelier, Culturati, and AMPIA. And the title of the panel is Why Hire BIPOC? And I just want to thank everyone that's joining us on the panel today. I'll introduce them shortly. I also want to thank everyone that's tuning in. You can watch this right now on AMPIA's Facebook page, and you can also watch it on their YouTube channel. And this will also be available after the fact in case you miss it. And I want to start off, since we are in a virtual world, with a land acknowledgement, but a land acknowledgement to all of Mother Earth. I think we're really fortunate that we get to call this planet our home, and that we all get to share this space together. So thank you to Mother Earth. It's a very simple land acknowledgement, but it's incredibly heartfelt, not just from myself, but I'm sure all of our panelists here today as well. So I'll start off with introducing who we have here with us. We have Georgina Lightning, and she's a member of the Samson Cree Nation and currently stars as Sophia on CBC's Trickster and also appears in APTN's Tribal. She's an award-winning actress and filmmaker with over 30 years of experience. We also have Trevor Solway, who is a Blackfoot filmmaker from Siksika Nation, and he's also the founder of Solway Entertainment and the Nappy Collective, which is a grassroots filmmaking society that develops Indigenous filmmaking talent. He's also a recent recipient of MRU's Horizon Award. We also have Michelle Wong, and she's a veteran producer and filmmaker with over 25 years of pro media experience. And she's currently the head of business affairs at 724 Films, which produces all kinds of incredible shows, including Winona Earp and Heartland. And we also have with us today Gillian Müller. She's a screenwriter, a producer, and also a member of the Visioning Committee for BIPOC TV and Film, which is a grassroots organization and collective currently based in Toronto of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Canada's film and TV industry. And BIPOC TV and Film is also the organization behind a newly released database that I'm sure many of you have heard about called HireBIPOC.com. BIPOC is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Some other terms that you've probably heard that are interchangeable, at least in this conversation, are IBPOC, which is Indigenous, Black, People of Color. Terms such as racialized, marginalized, racially diverse are also used. So just keep in mind that throughout the course of this conversation, some of those terms might be used interchangeably. And I think it's also important to understand that the conversation around how we describe ourselves is also something that is evolving and in a state of flux. So welcome everyone, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be able to have this conversation with all of you today, and really excited for the folks that are going to be tuning in and that'll be checking out what we have to share with everyone. So, we're really in this unprecedented time. There's an incredible opportunity right now to start making productions, not just in Alberta, but across the country, more equitable, more diverse, by creating real opportunities for professionals who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And although why hire BIPOC might seem like a really obvious question, it's also a very important question that we need to be asking that is relevant to everyone, and in particular to the production industry here in Alberta. So we're going to spend a little bit of time over the next hour. It's not a lot of time, but a little bit of time to unpack this question. So I'm going to start with you, Michelle. When it comes to inclusivity, and the idea of the productions that we're involved in being inclusive, being diverse, where do you see some of the gaps in Alberta's media industry?
That's a really good question. I've been in the industry actually almost 30 years, I'd say. So I look older than I am. It's a super important question because I can say from my own personal experience, and maybe the other panelists also share this, it wasn't unusual to be the only person of color in terms of my own experience in the school that I was raised. I grew up in a town called St. Paul, Alberta, and there were 2 Chinese families there. And so I really had a very different kind of experience growing up in being mostly the only person of color, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's amongst my peers, whether even in my job. And then when I went to university, I decided to go into education, but I was a drama major. And so it was really not unusual to be the only person of color, in the fine arts faculty. So I think I come to the question that you're asking very like through life experience, because there were some programs that were set up to help me advance for sure. And even today, when there's programs set up, I'm always appreciative in seeing any initiative that's going on, whether it's coming in a grassroots level, whether it's coming from a government level, a broadcaster level. I always say that these programs are super important, and I myself have benefited from them. I'd say throughout my career, my beginnings, a lot of my mentors were not people of color, and I'm very thankful for the experiences that I had with those mentors, because I always felt that politically there was an awareness of the importance of making the opportunity and the training available, to learn, because Alberta is still a very white province. I mean, admittedly, we're going through the pandemic right now. There's a lot of across the country. There's a lot of reaction to wearing masks, etc. But I think Alberta kind of stands forward and front with, I don't know if it's the conservatism here, but it's there is a challenge to being a person of color in Alberta. And I wouldn't say that there's tons of, I have been asked more than once to move out of Alberta and build my career in another city. I've had friends early in my 20s that basically told me they were tired of explaining themselves over and over to the same questions, right? Where are you from? Why are you here? And people saying, you should go to Vancouver, you should go to, Montreal, Toronto, etc., all that, where there's more diversity. And to be honest, my early experiences in my 20s, I managed to have an opportunity to go to Montreal and train at the National Film Board, at Studio D, in fact, which I'm very grateful for. And they were grooming me to basically have an opportunity to be at the National Film Board in my mid-20s, which they recognized. I think they recognized who I was. They were providing me with training and education and support. But I had to admit to myself, after spending about 3 years there, finishing my first film, that my stories were tied to where I came from, which is Alberta. And so I actually, when I finished my first film, I decided to return, when my first film was called Return Home, but to return to Alberta. And I have made my career in Alberta through my entire life. And it's mainly because this is my home. And my stories come from my experiences growing up in a small town in rural Alberta. And so I'm tied to this place, and I'm tied intrinsically. My stories are tied to being here. It's not the same for every person of color, obviously, but it is for me. So to be able to kind of spend 20, 25, 30 years building a career, being in a position now in which, and I know other panelists will agree, having the experiences that I have now, and to be able to pass that, not just experience, but opportunity, knowledge, expertise onto other people of color, which I did not have 25 years ago, I want to do it. So, the question of why hire BIPOC is a, it can be a very intellectualized question, but for me, it's a very heartfelt question. It strikes me to my core.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly relate to a lot of what Michelle is saying. I also call Alberta home, and have over 25 years of professional media experience. Like Michelle, often found myself to be one of the few minorities in a room, on a set, on air, in a meeting. And it's interesting how, despite the fact that as racialized folks who aren't, say, Indigenous, we may have ancestors that immigrated here, once you have the opportunity, or once you settle in somewhere, there is still very much a sense of belonging to that land that you're on, right? Trevor, I'd like to maybe have you jump in, because you're a recent graduate from MRU, but you also already have quite an extensive body of work under you through Solway Entertainment and the great work that Nappy Collective does. So maybe you can share some of your thoughts on where you see some of the gaps.
Yeah, I related a lot to what Michelle had said. Like, I grew up here in Alberta on Siksika, and I always wanted to be a filmmaker, like, from a very young age, but I just didn't see anybody doing it, like anybody who looked like me doing it. And so I just always didn't think it was a reality. And then I went to school in Vancouver. I went to an all-Indigenous film school, and it was actually like really enlightening for me to watch Indigenous films and be surrounded by Indigenous creatives. And just in the city of Vancouver itself, be surrounded by a diverse artistic community. But as a kid who grew up in Siksika, I really missed home, like, so much, and so I moved back to Alberta, and I live now in Calgary. But I remember when I first moved back, just being pulled out of that really creative environment really felt like vulnerable, and I just didn't think I was going to create anything ever again. Like, oh, that sounds really dramatic, but I went into a journalism program, and I thought my film career was kind of over. But then when I came back, I still had that need or feeling to make films, and so I just started making films. I just picked up a camera and just did some real, like, one-man documentary type stuff. And it was only out of necessity, because I couldn't find anyone else to make films with in Siksika. And so I started these film camps for a long time, for 4 summers while I was in my degree program, and that transitioned into the Nappy Collective. And so for the past 4 or 5 years now, I've been developing my own Indigenous, like, film crew on my reserve. And so some of these gaps, like, when I create my other work, like, it's hard to find Indigenous cinematographers or producers, or some of these, like, highly creative technical roles. It's hard to find, and there's a lot of auxiliary Indigenous roles you can get, like, like someone to PA for you, someone to AD or something. But I think it's like kind of the nature of the opportunities that are out there. I think a lot of Indigenous people are kind of kept in this, like, emergent role, or this, like, mentorship role, and those are really important on some of the really big productions. But I think at some point you have to put people in a position they're uncomfortable with. And I think with the Nappy Collective, a lot of the people in the Nappy Collective are first-time filmmakers, or they're in school for filmmaking, and for them to be a cinematographer, to be a director or an editor, it's putting them out of their comfort zone. And that was the only way for me to really to grow and get experience, was to be put in positions that I was uncomfortable with. And so for the Nappy Collective, for me, it's all about putting emergent filmmakers in positions where they can actually grow, and not keeping them in this dormant position.
Georgina, did you have anything you might want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I completely hear everybody here. I'm born of this land. My ancestors are born of this land. And like Michelle says, you write what you know. That's what you're taught in film school, right? Write what you know, because that's what resonates with everybody globally. So, being Indigenous from here, I'm Nahio. And just like Michelle too, I was the only, Native in my class. There was one Asian, and there was one Black guy, Manuel Mitra. So Harlan Ma was the Asian one. And there was so much racism. It was unbelievable. And here we are in 2020, and I think I've talked more on panels that are addressing racism in the last 2 months than I have in my whole entire life. The fact that the globe is talking about racism now, it's so incredibly important, especially in film, because film is the most powerful tool in the world for shaping perception. And one of the underlying missions that I've always had, which I just discovered, I think in the last year, one of the motivating factors for me in using film, in accessing film, is the power. It is unbelievably powerful. And so I've been addicted to that whole, the access to power because of the pain and the struggles that I've had growing up in Edmonton, Alberta, in the province of Alberta, where it is unbelievably racist. I was invited to be a part of an economic development panel to talk about educating people here in Alberta with the schools and institutions. As a professional woman, I was invited. But it translated on the screen, the way that they identified it was, this is an Indigenous perspective. Like, I'm always addressed by race before my professionalism. Nobody else is like that. Like, you don't go, you won't look on the list in the whole panel, in any panel, I don't care where you're talking. They don't say, this is a Ukrainian man's perspective. This is a German man's, point of view. Like, do they specify the white folks? Never. But they definitely point out our race before anything, And I was talking about this yesterday too, in a TV show that I'm in, also an animated show. It's the first time that I was actually in a room like this, where I was talking to people face to face. Beforehand, it had always been through email. Right? The audition is through another form, and you're always emailing. And then we finally saw each other's face, and I was like, "Whoa, okay, Okay, so here we go." So there was one other Native guy, and I said, "Thank God we have some Native. You guys are doing the inclusion thing. That's awesome." Because what I just learned about economic development is last year was the very first time in the history of Alberta that they ever had an Indigenous person involved in the discussions in the economy in Alberta. And I'm like, I'm blown away. I was blown away. Like, are you kidding me right now? With oil and like, that's on our land. Like, and we've never been a part of the discussion on economy. And my whole presentation was like, film is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the most untapped resource in the entire world, and I'm not exaggerating here, is Indigenous story. Like, Indigenous story is unbelievably connected. Anytime we tell a story from our place of knowingness, it resonates with everyone around the world. And there's a market out there. It's a massive market that purchases film. And so racist Hollywood, I was in that industry for 30 years, and racist Hollywood was never smart enough and could never get outside of their racist views to exploit that. We've been exploited in a million different ways. Like, why not exploit story, Indigenous story, multicultural stories? Alberta is such a platform of culture. Every kind of culture you can think of. This is a really rich province as far as, different ethnicities. So why is that not considered a resource? Why is that not something that, since we've always been exploited, why don't they exploit that? It's worth billions and billions of dollars, It really is, because, Older Than America is a film that I made 10 years ago. It's still getting acquisitions. It's in many different languages all over the world, because everybody understands and they resonate with oppression. Everybody does, and this is about a residential school. Well, it's a form of assimilation. This story that I tell, even though that wasn't, the focus point wasn't, I'm going to deal with racism. It was by educating people with Indigenous story or multicultural stories, we're actually eradicating racism. And that's very, very important. It's dangerous to continue to support the colonial message, the colonial narrative, which is a complete lie. It's not okay for us to, in today's day and age, when we have in Alberta anyways, it's so multicultural that we all have to be represented. It is important because our violence against women, domestic violence, missing and murdered women, mental health is hugely related to the narrative that's been painted by Hollywood that continues to be perpetuated and supported even here in Alberta. It doesn't make any sense to me. So now that we have power, because the internet gives us power, right? That's what revolutionized everything in the first place. Well, let's take it to another level now. And now that George Floyd was murdered so violently in front of the world. You know, everybody's more sensitive about it, but I'm hoping that in this, you know, in all the promises to make a difference and to change policies and to offer more opportunities, I hope it's genuine, you know. I hope it's not just lip service. You know, I had been a part of lip service in Hollywood for several years, and that's like Trevor said, it was out of necessity I turned into a producer. It wasn't like I, you know, grew up going, I want to be a producer, I want to make films. I want to be an actor. I wanted to be a part of other people's visions. You know, I never saw myself as a storyteller ever, because again, like Trevor said, we that didn't exist. You know, when I grew up, there was 2 channels in Edmonton. There was 2 channels and there was 1 French channel, and it was very it was 100% white. There was no such thing as a colored person on television, and there was no native stories. It was all the binary story. There was a white mommy and a white daddy and kids and the puppy dog. You know, it's like that was the reality I grew up in. So the illusion is that the superior or dominant race is white, when in fact they're not. They're the lowest population in the world. You know, they're only like 700 million people. The rest is 7.2 billion people are all people of color. So, you know, it's our time to take control. And so we need to start exercising. We need to our rights, and we need to start utilizing all of the programming. And it's got to even go further than that. You know, having a little division of one big giant programming slot isn't enough. We should have at least 3/4. I'm just saying. Not trying to be greedy, but you know.
Well, it's I think what you're saying is quite interesting, because you know, I recently heard the term the new global majority, which essentially encompasses folks who are racialized as being the majority population on the planet. So on that note, you know, with the idea of having more creative control, having more control over our own voices, our own stories, and becoming empowered to be able to do that, I think one of the things that obviously needs to happen if we want to, you know, start creating change within the cultural sector is also taking a hard look at some of the negative stereotypes that do exist of folks who are BIPOC. And that, forgive me, Gillian, I'm wondering if maybe you can touch a little bit on that as somebody, you know, who's part of the visioning committee for BIPOC TV and film. When it comes to competency, when it comes to how BIPOC folks can be viewed, from your perspective, how do the standards seem to differ for folks who are BIPOC?
So one of the things that we've really noticed doing the work that BIPOC TV and film does is that the BIPOC community is infantilized. There's a lot of mentorship programs, a lot of like learning programs going into the high school systems, going into the university systems. And I'm like an OG Torontonian from a big old mix-up West Indian or Trinidadian family. So I have diversity in my own family. And when I got into the film industry, I was surprised to see how homogenized it was. And one of the things that we have to take a look at as the community, as the BIPOC community, but also as individuals who come from families who may not necessarily have had a middle-class upbringing. This is a brutal business that takes a certain amount of longevity and stick-to-itiveness that you have to stick around. And sometimes what we see in the film business, the film and television, any kind of media, is that it is a very middle-class group, because people have to kind of make a commitment to be poor for 5, 10, 15, 20 years in order to make their break in. My own family, my grandparents, they think that going into the arts was lazy man's work. And that is something that I just had to deal with as like a child of immigrants, was that they wanted me to have a practical life. They wanted me to be a good immigrant, a good citizen, an idealized person. And that meant if I wanted to go into the arts, I was somehow defying them. And so within our own communities, we have to take a look back at that stuff and talk about the importance of art. Like Georgina said, this is the single most powerful industry for changing hearts and minds. And if we want to dismantle the systemic racism and social biases, we need more people to join this business on the creative side. But, and this is incredibly important to us at BIPOC TV and Film, on the technical side, on the crew side, we need eyes and ears everywhere so that when people are creating something, that we're dismantling the tropes and stereotypes that people who may not know better, who may not have processed their own histories as well, in order to change things. And that is something that we all have to do as a collective, intersectionally. But also one of the main things that we have to do for those of us who are already in the business is to take a look at who our allies are and to kind of change the point of view that we need to start upgrading folks who are already in the business. Allowing people opportunities to fail is essential in creative worlds, and a lot of people don't want newbies in the creator seats because they're not going to be able to handle the pressure. But we know for a fact that because of internalized bias, we allow specifically white men, but also a lot of white women to upgrade faster because we trust them more. So, I know I'm speaking about a lot of different things in these moments, and anybody who's here right now is obviously interested in this. So I challenge everyone to take a look at who they know and give them more responsibility, more opportunities, to upgrade people who already exist, and to not think of the BIPOC community as someone who's in their 20s, basically, to start. I could write a whole manifesto, but just to start, let's think of the creative BIPOC community as people who are really tapped into what they want to say, maybe more than just, average, God bless, but somebody who was inspired by Steven Spielberg and just wants to emulate their work. The BIPOC community has amazing stories that we've never heard before. If you want to hear something new, you tap into that group of people, that group of creatives.
Trevor, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, this reminded me of a story I once heard. I was at a pretty prominent film festival one year, and I was just kind of at one of the social gatherings at a bar, and then somebody heard I was from Calgary. I said I was from Calgary, and they're like, "Oh, you should meet so and so. They're a producer from Calgary," and kind of from table to table, we finally get to this person, and it's this old white guy. And he's a couple beers deep, and I'm a couple beers deep. So he asked me, "Oh, you're native, right?" Obviously, and then I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, the problem with native filmmakers is no one's really trying. I watch native films and nobody's really trying." And it was just and then sometimes racism like that, you don't have a answer that's ready to go. You just kind of are shocked by it. Did you just really say that? In this social setting where I'm supposed to behave. And as a native person, when you're around alcohol, it's always is this guy gonna black out? Is this guy gonna, So it's always you always have to behave even more. And so and then that bothered me, right? And I sat with it for a bit, and then I kind of realized every time I'm on a crew that's not Indigenous, it's always is he gonna show up on time? Is he gonna try to bail out early? Is he looking for the easy way to do it? And I'm always partnered with somebody who knows how to do it better than me, or supposedly does it better than me. And so it's just the standard of we need to work harder, and also this trust. There's not a lot of trust in us. And as natives, we're always thought we're always perceived we're gonna steal something. Maybe that's from old Western movies where we'd run into town and steal something. But not being trusted around gear, or not being trusted around money, we're not trusted to handle money. So it's just I don't know. There's a lot of things we need to overcome. That are put on, negative stereotypes that are put on us. And also sometimes another weird thing is that when we're told to vet a script that has Indigenous content, and it's always oh yeah, we're hoping you can bring this really tough, resilient activism angle to it, or we're really hoping you can really tap into the spirituality of the script and really bring out the spirit guides. it's like, Native people can't just be normal people. We always have to be like this really strong activist or this really, deeply in tune medicine man. And, we can't just be living people. And so sometimes, like, we can't just be creatives and create stuff. And sometimes, like I tell the collective, Minopi Collective, is that, our films, they're not Indigenous comedies, they're not Indigenous dramas, kind of like what Georgina was saying. They're just comedies and dramas or horror films. They just happen to take place on the res. They just happen to take place with brown people. They happen to take place with stories that were familiar to us. It's white people that put us in this brown box. And don't do that to yourself. So just like keep making your films, and you don't have to overly make it Native so people can identify with it or something, or try to tag you with that Indigenous tag. Just keep telling your story.
Trevor, I really appreciate what you've just said. I can certainly resonate with it as well. And Michelle, perhaps you can too, where despite having like a certain amount of education, a certain amount of experience, even on award-winning productions, you can still be viewed through very different eyes, and be in a position where you feel like you are constantly having to prove yourself. Now, of course, with this business, I think that is also a little par for the course in a way where, we've heard that expression, that phrase, that you're only as good as your last project. We can put a lot of pressure on ourselves in general in the film and TV business, but specifically from a BIPOC perspective, your thoughts as someone who's highly experienced on some of the stereotypes, some of the ways in which BIPOC can be viewed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Gillian, Trevor, Georgina, everybody has said things that I know we're both nodding very hard on a lot of things that we're hearing from each other, because that has definitely been the experience. I mean, I guess if I continue on with the line of what I was saying, when you're the only person of color that you really know, it is a connection to the passion for the art. Definitely for myself, that kept me going. Like in terms of the conversation around what was acceptable, like Gillian mentioned in families, it was hard for me to explain to my parents that I wanted to be in the film and TV industry, because they don't really know what that is. Their only concern was they wanted me to make a living and to be happy making a living. And so I went into education to be a teacher, because that was something concrete that they could absorb. But I was a drama major and an English minor because I wanted to learn about acting and theater and play. I wanted to be a screenwriter, actually. That was the career that I wanted to do when I was 18. And to try to kind of navigate your family's own doubts about what you're doing. But if I could say, well, I'm a teacher, I'm going to be a teacher, then that's something that they could accept. And then as I went through the experience of, getting my degree, bringing my intelligence, thank God, to the table to do well, when I taught for 3 years, and then I decided to change careers and do what I really wanted to do, which was go into film and TV. And, my family just kind of didn't understand why I would throw away a good paying job to go into an industry that I knew from very young. Much like Trevor, I was very passionate about film, went to see movies when I was 7 years old, 8 years old. I remember 50 cents a movie, going in, crossing the street, going to the theater, that passion to be part of an industry that even at that time wasn't yet very large. And I had a cousin that expressed an interest to be an actor. And I know that her family, kind of dissuaded her from it, and she went into something else. But I have to say, if she had stayed in it and graduated as an actor, like Sandra Oh was getting a lot of work in Canada because obviously because of her identity. And I thought to myself, gosh, if my cousin had gotten into it, I think she would have actually done really well, and it would have been a passion for her. So in terms of I would say that being born and raised in Alberta around predominantly a white culture, that I went through my own process of dealing with my own internalized racism to deal with what being Chinese really meant, because all I knew about being Chinese is what I was told in school. with my other classmates, and I had to balance that up against my family, who were real Chinese. And even to this day, I've always feel like I'm kind of walking in two worlds, whether it's East and West, whether it's arts versus industry, whether it's, like being a woman, being gay. Like, I'm always balancing things, and that's just a reality for me. So when it comes to building a career in the industry, I always intuitively was attracted to people that maybe understood that. Of course, they were white. I'm not going to pretend. It's not that I could look around and find another, Asian or BIPOC producer at the time. There just wasn't any. I mean, if I wanted to do it, I had to, become that producer, as Georgina says, and do it. Like, there was no choice. And you couldn't fail because the stakes in film and TV are too expensive to fail, right? I mean, it was a trial by fire. It was trial through passion. It was something I had to do. I had that story in me, and I left an opportunity in Montreal to come back to Alberta to build my career because, to be honest, in the 3 years I was in Montreal, I did not have one single creative thought. Imagine that. Being in your 20s, being gifted an opportunity, being told that you're appreciated, that they could see the potential in you, and to know deep inside yourself that the stories you want to tell have nothing to do with being in Quebec. I was a small fish in a big pond, completely felt over my head and completely detached from my stories. I didn't grow up there. I didn't understand it. And so I had to break a lot of hearts and walk away from that opportunity and go sling popcorn in a local repertory theater because it was putting me near movies. And I had to starve like every other filmmaker, live on $300, $500 a month for 5 years of your life, live off your visas to figure out your opportunity and build and I guess kind of create the resilience and strength. Like, I would say that is what I had to develop for myself, with the guidance of some very kind industry people in Alberta, to be where I am now, to be able to, share this experience and hopefully make the path a little bit easier for other BIPOC people, to maybe inspire so that people know that, yeah, it's going to take 5 or 10 years. I tell that to everybody that's going into the career. It doesn't matter if they're BIPOC or not. It's a long road, and you have to believe in yourself. And absolutely, our stories have yet to hit the screen. I have a story in me that's my mother's story that I pitched to a telefilm executive 20 years ago, who was like, wow, that's an amazing story. And the only frustration for me was knowing that I didn't have the skills and expertise yet to be able to bring that story to the screen, like, flat out. Mm-hmm. So I guess, that's the reality for me in terms of the experience, the lived experience. But I'm very happy and acknowledge that industry is starting to do a very difficult thing, which is share their privilege. That's what we're asking people to do. Yeah. And that's really hard. Like, whether you're a woman asking a white woman to share her privilege, whether you're a filmmaker asking an organization to share their privilege, mm-hmm. because everybody knows the difficulty it takes to get to a top, even in their version of it. And when you're there and you're asking them to share their power, to not just, as Trevor would say, a person that's beside you that has more qualifications so you don't screw up. It's more like, okay, can you just move to the side a little bit and give me some space and let me show you what I can do? Because I have made the same sacrifices as you've made, right? I've starved for my art just like you. And my story is probably more original than yours. And it needs to be told by me, because that's what makes it original, is our voice makes it original. So when people go like, oh, you don't have the resume, you don't have, yeah, absolutely. I would say you're right, I don't. But give me a shot and you might be impressed. And let's both benefit. Let's both continue to keep this momentum going.
Beautiful, Michelle. That was really so many incredible little nuggets in there. I love the smile on Trevor's face right now. I love all of the head nodding that we're seeing. So from here, there's two questions I kind of want to ask from all of this, because the next part of our discussion in terms of unpacking why Hire BIPOC is now about creating the opportunities for BIPOC talent, not just in this province, but across the country. When one of the questions is, how do we create more equitable opportunities? But maybe just before that, I actually want to jump into something more than one of you has touched on, which is the idea and the notion of original content, original storytelling coming from authentic voices. I was going to turn to Georgina, but she's just stepped away. So Trevor, I'd love for you to maybe tell us your thoughts on this. Why is it important for BIPOC, for Indigenous folks, for racialized folks to be creating and telling their own stories?
That's a great question. And I think, for a long time, Indigenous people, we haven't been in ownership of our own stories. And you look at Western films and even our depiction on sports teams logos like Chicago Blackhawks, Cleveland Indians, the deceased Washington Redskins, and for people always say, oh, it's just a jersey, but that's our image. When I grew up, that's the only image I saw in mainstream culture. And those images, what they're sending is that we're either relics of the past or we're savages. And so, like when we show up in a grocery store and people we're followed around, like we're gonna steal something, or we get those dumb questions like, oh, do you still live in a teepee? It's because of Western films. And when you look at the news, you see we're always murdered or missing, or we're wanted. And so, for me as a kid growing up, like I had really low self-esteem, and I went to a very small town school that had a lot of racism there. And so, I thought I was gonna end up like dead or in the streets or something like that. And so, like these images, they can be really damaging and harmful to Indigenous youth. So for me, filmmaking, like when it's my documentaries or my narrative films, it's always important for me to put our image up there, and not always in like this, you can't achieve this level of success, but just as real people. People can relate to them and be like, hey, I know that's my cousin, that's my uncle, I know somebody like that. I think it really goes a long way for people to see representation on the screen.
Georgina, I know you definitely will have all kinds of incredible things to share about the need for racialized folks to be telling their own stories.
Well, it's important for so many reasons, but just the very first top one is racism, mental health issues. I mean, for us to be telling our own stories, for one, when you write a narrative, there's a perspective that's completely different from the homogenized, the patriarchal mindset. And I'm just let's just start with the creation story. My creation story as a Nehiyah. There's 13 moons. Okay, there's 13 markings on a turtle's back. We call this land Turtle Island, where we live. Okay, between those 13 moons is a cycle of 28 days. A woman is birthed from this cycle. We're that connected to the universe that we have a cycle every 28 days, 13 times in 1 year. Okay, so in knowing all of this kind of stuff, it connects us deeper and makes us understand that we are all related. At the end of any one of our prayers or ceremonies, we always say we are all related. I've been to a lot of Lakota ceremonies. We say with Dakwiyasi, we are all related. Everybody universally understands that we are. What happens with the homogenized creation story is we are not related. So it's easier for people to agree to exploit the land, to extract oil, to contaminate waters, and who cares about all the living creatures that are, becoming extinct because of the pillaging of the earth that they are not created and then not related to. So I think it's very, very important. I think Indigenous people all over the world understand that we are all related. So when we don't hear from a perspective, any story that comes from an Indigenous person who is connected, there's too much mental illness that goes on. There's too much dysfunction. There's so many epidemics are created because of this story that the narrative that we've lived with for 120 years is the age of film. And that's as long as this narrative has been painted and dominating our continent. So where women are created and have a cycle every 28 days and considered sacred, like next to creator is a woman who is very sacred and has the honor and privilege. It's the holiest of holy that there is, to be able to give life, as a life giver. That is so very sacred. And whereas the creation story from the Munya, or the white people, they have an Adam and Eve, and there was an apple eaten, and because there was a piece of fruit eaten, this Eve, she was cursed to have a cycle every 28 days to remind her of the sinner she is. So she was immediately put down, and she is like a disgrace. She's shameful. And it's why we have missing and murdered women. It's why we have domestic violence at such a high rate all over the world. I mean, that narrative supports so much dysfunction and fragmentation of society. It's wrong. And to only have one perspective, so it's very important for us to share our Indigenous perspective with the world, because we connect on a different level. I'm pretty sure any non-white community shares that understanding that we are related, we are connected to everything. So then we care about the land, because that's we care about our brothers and sisters all over the world, because we are related to them. They live on the different lands, but we are connected to everybody. So then we have more compassion for them. We won't let them starve in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world. We've got poverty right here. We've got a camp that was happening all summer of people that are homeless, and there was no consciousness about that. Like, it just shocks me. You're only as good and healthy as your poorest person, and there's no understanding of that here. Everybody is so removed from that, right? It's about, how can I get more? How can I take more? How can I control more? That's why, in saying, like how Michelle talks about the privilege, we're asking the non-Indigenous communities to share and understand their privilege and to open the door. Because it's like, if we empower all the cultures, I'm not joking, oil was the driving force in this country. Alberta was like the granddaddy, like the godfather of the world, according to Canada. So it's like, wow. But now they've lost their power. So if you really, really, really want to be the godfathers of the country, tap into Indigenous story, empower those people, become allies, and really put your resources into telling multicultural stories, because then you will be the godfather of the country, if that's what you really care about. Like, I don't care about that, but if that's something that's a driving force in your world, it's like to be able to control and have the power. That's the way to do it, because the most powerful thing in the world, money doesn't compare to the power that cinema has, that story has. Story shapes minds. Mm-hmm. That's power. That is massive power. So, money aside, if you really want to understand all of that, and that's why, media is owned by 6 companies in the whole wide world. They want to control people's minds and the perception of the world so that they can control it. It's really a mental illness all on its own. But, aside from that, I mean, really, it's the decent thing to do, right? Is to just understand that we are related and empower everybody. It's our turn, it's our turn. The world is saying that. The world is on our side for once. So the world collectively, we are allies for each other. So, you know, and we now have the power because we are the majority. We just have to collectively get together and vote the people out that are not on our party. I'm sorry to say, but we're going to do that now. You know, I've been a part of the U.S. system for 30 years. We collectively got together, and everybody was working together to get Obama elected. Barack Obama, who is an amazing human being, not a Black human being. He's an amazing human being, and his wife, beautiful human being. So as Indigenous people, we got together and campaigned for this man and his wife, and they won. And history was changed forever. They had their first African-American leader in the White House. Even calling it the White House is so racist. It's like everything about it is unbelievably racist on every level. You could analyze it all from the ground up, and it is all oppressive. It is all programming and messaging, you know. But yeah, with Barack in there, and now look, we have a woman as the first vice president, and she's a woman of color. So that's what people can do when they get together, you know. And now that we are the majority, we can collectively get together and politically change things. So it would be better to have like just an understanding there, so that we can do it amicably and really, you know, in a much more civilized way. But if it doesn't happen, we can definitely get together and do that. You know?
Just to dovetail off of that, Georgina, thank you. I like to think, like when Michelle talks about sharing privilege, I like to add this idea and this notion to it that privilege is not finite. You know, storytelling is not finite. Like really, storytelling is abundant, right? There's no limitation to the number of stories that could be told in the world, and no limitation to the number of people that could tell those stories. So a great way to look at privilege is to understand that it's not finite and that it is something that can be shared, because there's more than enough of it to go around. There's more than enough abundance, for example, to go around. And Gillian, I want to turn it over to you, because BIPOC TV and Film has created a database called HireBIPOC.com. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about it, why it was created.
We kept hearing the same excuse over and over and over again whenever we confronted them being producers, being broadcasters, being communications officers, being, you know, bureaucrats, all of that stuff, was that we couldn't find anyone to write the story in order to portray themselves as someone who's tapping into all of the different kinds of storytelling. Just, you know, taking in, for example, the MOW business, which is a multi-million-dollar business. It's sort of the same look of people over and over and over again. And we know that if the creator is a person from a community, they're going to create content with their community represented. So we have to go right down to the source, into the screenwriting, into the producing, into the people who want to amplify those stories. And so what we were hearing from producers, for example, for MOWs, was we couldn't find MOW writers of color to do an MOW of color, or, you know, and that's just a small example, but it's across the board. So in reaction to that, a lot of the community organizations have been building databases, which is, you know, so there are several databases out there. Hire BIPOC is just one of them. And we can certainly promote all of them, because the excuse we couldn't find someone to write that story had to stop. The other thing is that I was born and raised in downtown Toronto in a multi-faith, multicultural family. And I was, you know, one of many different varieties growing up. And so when I got into the film industry and saw that it was mostly white, particularly in crews, I was curious about why. This is just my own personal take on it, but I was curious about why there wasn't the same amount of diversity in this industry as I see out on the subway. and noticed that there were these sort of infrastructure barriers of entry that I touched on earlier, the amount of money that it costs to get into the union, the fact that folks aren't encouraged to do a trade very much anymore, the fact that show business seems like kind of an impossible thing. But we wanted to make sure that there's a diversity of crew behind the scenes. Specifically, we are right now campaigning for folks to join the unions. If you are an electrician, if you are a carpenter, the unions are specifically looking for Black hairdressers. These are really essential folks in the industry that we need to promote and uplift and remove the barriers of entry for them. And so the databases are places for you as an employer to go and say, you know what, I'm mindful right now that I want to make sure that my crew is diverse. I want to make sure that the people behind the scenes can make the people in front of the camera feel comfortable. If you're going to do a story where the majority of your casts are, you know, a part of one group or another, you want behind the scenes to be a safe place for them to act, you know, with freedom. And we know for a fact, there are lots of things that we know for a fact. And one of the things is that if you are doing emotional, racialized storytelling in front of the camera, but the crew that's watching you are people who are checked out, you're not doing your best work. If you can't feel safe to break down a trope or a stereotype because everyone around you is reinforcing those tropes and stereotypes, then we're not going to see changes. So what we want to do is set a safer place for everybody involved. And we want to make sure that in this moment, when people are mindful of it, they have easy places to go. So I would encourage everybody who's in a position of hiring to find out about all of the databases. There's a director's database that comes out of Vancouver. There's the Real World database. There's Film and Color, as well as Hire BIPOC. There's also a bunch of resources that you can tap into that are just spreadsheets, people who are in the area. And if you don't see one in your area, I would encourage you to start with your smaller network. This is a grassroots kind of thing, and we all are doing it for each other. We're all doing it together. I know it's such a cheesy thing to say, we're all in this together, but we are all in this together. We have to, as a community, keep communicating with each other. Panels like this are exciting and invigorating because even just the thought that we're all on the same page and that we can amplify and uplift each other. And the other thing is, one of the things that we have to make sure that we do is to make sure that we have narrative sovereignty, so that the producers, the people who are making the money off of these stories, are a part of the community or recontributing back into the community. They're not doing more damage or reinforcing that damage as well. So with these databases, as a producer, you can go to these databases and find directors and writers and other producers who are not a part of your own community, so that you can uplift other people's stories as well, even if you are a part of the dominant culture. It's time to dismantle your privilege. And I know that feels like oppression, but trust me, the feeling you get when you see that person that's like, I've never seen me on the screen before and you did that, that's worth more than any dollar bill that anyone could give you. When you get out of the way so that people can make their art, that is the best feeling in the world. So I encourage everyone to visit, sign up. If you are cast, crew, creator, sign up for all of the databases, put yourself out there, get yourself in there, and keep connecting with people, lateral networking. I know it's hard in these times, but these are amazing moments to show our solidarity with each other. That's what the term BIPOC means to me. Black, Indigenous, people of color means solidarity. We're all here supporting each other. It doesn't mean that you're allowed to lump us all in one group. You know, the LGBTQ2S plus community are not all just one group, but the term BIPOC is solidarity. and we are building something amazing. And think about all the little BBs who are interested in film that are finally getting to see themselves on the screen. And if you can see it, you can be it. I know that's like really a, like go rah rah, but like, come on, everybody, go rah rah.
No, that's awesome, Gillian. So that database that BIPOC TV and Film has come out with is called Hire BIPOC. Is it .com or .ca? I always forget.
Both.
It's both. Great. So just Google it. Some of the other databases that Gillian has also mentioned, I'll just quickly mention as well. Oh my God, I was supposed to turn off my email and I didn't. Access Real World is the one that Real World Film Festival and Screen Institute has put out. There's Film in Color. There's also another one I'm aware of on the West Coast called Culture Brew Art. And if you want some of this information, just get in touch with us afterwards. So if you are a racialized person, I would encourage you to actually check out every single database and sign up for every single one. That's what I did, even though I've been in the business for over 25 years, and Michelle is the same. I have never in my lifetime seen this type of opportunity. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I never thought that I would. So to me, this is incredibly inspiring. And there's just this, we just have this wonderful opportunity to really leverage this in the right way, to try and create that space that needs to be created for racialized voices, for artists and creatives who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, not just here in Alberta, but across the country. There's all kinds of exciting conversations that are happening. This is one of them. And we'd encourage you to reach out with other folks, like Gillian said, lateral networking, reach out to people that you want to be having these conversations with. And if you're also an ally and you want to learn more, then just approach folks that you know with an honesty that simply says, you know what, I only know what I know, but I would like to learn more. I would like to become more informed. Can you direct me to resources that I can check out? That's one of the thoughts that I just want to pass on. And I know we're just a little bit over time, but before we wrap things up, I want to check in with all of our panelists. Are there any closing thoughts that any of you just want to throw out there?
I mean, I always do.
Gillian, go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to encourage everyone out there to stick with it. It's worth it. I know, like, being broke stinks. Find your home. You shouldn't have to move in order to have the career you want. You should be mobile, like go to Vancouver for a meeting, go to LA for a meeting, visit, Paris, London, Tokyo, all of those things. But if you find the place that inspires you the most, stay there, because you can create from wherever you are, and stick with it because it's worth it. And we need you. We need your stories. So that's, all big love to everybody out there. This is an interesting time, and, we need you. Stay with us.
Georgina?
Well, I know that like prior to maybe the last year or even 2 years, it might have seemed like the most daunting career to enter. And it was. 30 years has been like, I have seen no progress. And I actually posted something about that. But with Wes Studi winning the Oscar, first actor, Native American actor to get an Oscar, all the way to Trickster being on a major platform. This is an Indigenous content project from showrunner to intern and everything in between. So it's really relevant, and it's really awesome storytelling because it's dictated and it's executed by First Nations people, by multicultural audiences are watching it all over the world. And then Telefilm and CMF, everybody is changing policies in order to invite and allow opportunity now. So now I would say this is the perfect time to enter this field. We need you, we want you, and there's so much understanding there with our allies, IATSE included. I talk to them. just to give them some kudos right now. They actually had a discussion. I had, pitched something to them a year before George Floyd, and they were open and said, absolutely, we understand what you're saying, and we want to create opportunities in IATSE. And in LA we have 13 unions. Here it's like everybody's grouped into one. It's called IATSE, but in order to create opportunities. So Native Media Network, what we used to do in the US, is going to be able to happen here. So it means every key person that's hired takes 2 interns underneath and trains them, and teaches them everything they know and phases themselves out. Sorry, but that's the way it is, right? If you got to walk the talk, but that's what's happening now. So we've got support, IATSE, Tom, and all those folks, and the Directors Guild, and Donna and Tina at APTRA. They all have said that they're willing in this province to open the door and create more opportunity. So this perfect time to get in. And don't believe what people say. It's, oh, that's an art. It's not. It's an industry. It's a business. It's not an art. It is, they use art, but they exploit it in a business way. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's
awesome.
That's what we call it, film business, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Michelle?
I think it's been well said by everybody on the panel. My only thing is to thank you, Shivani, for creating the space for this conversation. Thanks to everybody who's watching this webinar. Hopefully you're as inspired as we are with the words that we're talking about and the passion that we're sharing. We're in it for the long haul. I always used to tell people, film and television is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And if you commit to this industry, it will commit to you in terms of, it's such an interesting, ever-changing industry. You'll never get bored of it. So if it's something that you want to go into, we're here to support and inspire you. And I just thank you very much for creating this space for AMPIA anyway.
Thank you, Michelle. Trevor, I just want to turn it over to you for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think I got two closing thoughts. One, for any ally, settler, white folks that are watching, if you're, trying to create these opportunities for BIPOC people, it's not just a checklist or something that you do to pass the requirement. I think the work really has to start within yourself, and to really check those biases and check those stereotypes you might have and those racist notions, and do your own work. And I think listening to this panel is step one. Maybe the staircase is 100 steps, but to do that work for yourself, to unlearn those indirect and direct racist notions you may have. And because if you hire somebody and you haven't done that work, it can be really harmful to somebody who's working under you, and it might turn them away from the industry, and you might never hear those stories that they might have told. And two, was kind of echoing what Gillian said. Jesse Wente once told me that to hold on. If you're an Indigenous creative out there, or if you're just looking to get into creative, just keep holding on to that dream, and keep, sometimes film production is hard and it's long days, but just keep holding on, because I think big things are coming. And kind of what Georgina was saying, back in her day, there was 2 channels. In my day in the 90s, there was more channels than that, but there's still predominantly white voices behind those channels. But I think with online platforms and streaming services, and now TikTok, everybody has a camera in their pocket. Indigenous people, I think with this interesting flux of old media and new media, and I think people of color and our BIPOC people, our story is going to come out on top in a big way.
Everyone, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this panel today. I want to thank everyone who's been tuning in and watching. It's been a real privilege and an honor to share this space with you. I personally am thrilled that we've been able to create the space to have this conversation. I'd also really like to thank AMPIA as well. I'd like to thank Bill Evans. I'd like to thank Colette Switzer. And I also would love to thank Matt Waterworth. He is an AMPIA board member who donated his time to this process, and the technical wizard behind this panel, and it looking so great. I also am just going to quickly throw out there as well that if you are a racialized film, TV, media, arts professional in Alberta, whether you're emerging to established, and you are looking to connect with others, there is a new organization that has just launched called Creatives Empowered. So you can Google that, creativesempowered.ca, and you can learn a little bit more about what that organization does. It's really designed to represent and to empower the racialized talent that's in this province. Everyone, thank you so much. I hope you all have a beautiful day.